This is Jack Davis. It's June 14th, Flag Day, and it's 7:31, and we're calling this special meeting of the RTM Finance and Budget Committee together. This is going to be solely a working session. So, what I want to do is first hear from those who have taken a tour, and then you may have heard that I've been working on a model. I'm going to explain what's in the model. I'm not sharing any of the numbers at this time, but we can go through it and go from there. So we'll go from there. I've been asked for public comment tonight, and I'm not because it's a special meeting and a working session. So I'm just going to pick people who have gone on the tour and just get people's opinion one way or another. Whatever you want to say about it, if you have nothing else to say other than it's pretty, that's fine. I don't care. So we'll start with Martha. You've taken the tour, correct?
I have. It's a very nice, natural, tranquil piece of property with a little bit of, with some houses on it. I think it's very pretty. It would make wonderful trails, perhaps picnic groves where, no cars would pull up. Maybe, I think it's very natural, and I'm hoping that it will be retained principally in its natural state. But it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I think we have to seize it.
Okay. Beth, you're next.
I could say almost word for word what Martha just said. I was very on the fence about it because I just feel like this is such an extraordinarily large sum of money for a piece of property. But I took the tour this morning, and now that I've seen everything, I just don't think we would be good stewards of the environment or for the town by passing this up. That having been said, I would like to drill down further in the financials.
Yeah, we're going to do that tonight. Charles, you're next.
So I haven't seen the property. My thought is, I feel that we should view this as an addition, as a potential addition of wealth to the town of Darien, as opposed to an expenditure. We're not proposing to spend a large amount of money on something that will depreciate over a 25 or 50-year period. We're talking about something that has effectively permanent value to the town. So I'm not quite sure how we do the economics on that. That'll take a bit of research, but that's my thinking on it.
Okay. I'm going to skip. Bert, are you ready? I don't hear you, Bert. Bert.
We're going to hear you.
Bert, we're going to come back to you because we can't hear you. Iris, have you toured it yet?
Yes, I toured it this morning with Beth.
Morning, yeah.
We had a lovely time.
Okay, and
We solved all the world's problems.
Okay.
What? I think it is it's almost close to a duty of our town to buy this property,
Okay.
and not let it go to development.
Well, I don't think it's ever going
I
to
think
development, but I'm not going to address that. The numbers don't make sense. So what they said, I've checked with people. I don't agree with that, but I don't think that has any bearing on it because we have the contract.
Then why'd you say that? Because if it's either the realtor's lying to us because it says she's got developers out there that are going to buy it and do something with it. I mean, there's sewer that runs all the way out to the, tip of the island.
Well, I'm not going to get into that, but the fact is we have the contract and I agree with what you're saying.
You already did, Jack.
I know, I shouldn't have done that. Barry?
I mean,
Oh, go
if
ahead.
somebody thinks there isn't a developer out there, then yeah, we don't have any rush. But if there are developers out there, then we have a rush. I think maybe we're in a rush to buy it, but I don't think we have to be in any rush to develop it or figure out what we're going to do with it. I think that is a long-term proposition and that there's plenty of trails and stuff out there for the people in town to use it as is. I think we shouldn't be too short-sighted to kick the renters out while we're trying to figure things out. I think that's an easily done addendum to everybody's lease to have the town's liabilities solved. I think that's a good revenue stream for the moment until we figure things out. I think that is just something that obviously we want to nail down the numbers, but I think that with this opportunity, we need to buy this piece of property.
Barry? Oh, sorry. I've done that twice to you now.
Okay. But I do want to understand why you think it's not ever going to get developed.
We can talk about that afterwards. I want to go through this and then I'll go through what we're working on tonight. Barry, do you want to, have you had a chance to talk?
Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
I think
Yes.
Iris summed up my views on it. I went on the tour Sunday morning. We had a very good tour. The place is quite impressive. It's not the first time I've ever been on it, but so I've seen many of the facilities before, but I'd never been through the mansion. That was quite amazing. I don't believe we can really pass up an opportunity like this. In fact, I think for at least the last 5 years, I've been commenting to many people that I couldn't understand why the town hadn't bought it to turn it into a park. That sums it up.
Peter?
There's not much more I think I can add to what's already been said. It's a magnificent piece of property. As I've told some people, I know the property very well from having friends that lived there for a number of years and spent a lot of time there. It's magnificent. There's no question about it. I'm conflicted because of needing to nail down the numbers better, as others have said. The rushed analysis, the time frame concerns me. I'd like to see some ideas about how we could bring the price tag down, perhaps by selling Highland Farms. But I think it's other than the concern about the impact on other town spending, I'm pretty much in line with everyone else here.
I would support the Highland Farms issue.
Pardon?
I would support Peter's idea about Highland Farms.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Louisa?
Yes, hi. I have not been in the property. I was traveling, but I watched the video that Jim Cameron sent by email. So it's pretty impressive, and I think it's an opportunity of a lifetime. And I have talked to a lot of people around my neighborhood, the Cherry Lawn Park, and neighbors, and everybody is quite excited. The coastal views and the ability to just have access to the water is priceless. And yes, I hope that I can still go in person, but I watched the video and it's very impressive.
Louisa, I'm going to send you there's some additional times this week, this coming week and next week and I'll send you the schedule and the person to see if you can
Oh, I
get in.
love it. Yes. Yes, sorry, I
Okay.
was away in California, but I watched the
No,
video.
that's not a problem. Not a problem.
Okay.
I'll plan on going as also.
Jack, who's caller 01?
Yeah, I'm trying to get that. Caller 01.
So Mark Adeletta.
Yeah, I thought it was Mark. Okay.
Mark.
Have you had a chance to tour it, Mark?
I have, Jack. Unquestionably, I think it's a stunning and desirable piece of property. I mean, the equestrian, the coastal, the marine activities afforded are unique and a treasure I think many will want to preserve for Darien's future for generations. In touring the site, there's obvious, some obvious immediate items that would have to be addressed for this could ever be available to the public, as far as securing unused buildings and maybe some hazards. And so I know a lot of financial analysis is going into this. I would like to know that those unforeseen or items that would have to be addressed to make this accessible are factored into any budget forecast, not just operating, but there's probably some capital items to secure some of those sites I saw that are darn attractive and very, very interesting, but open them up to John Q. Public would need some work.
Okay.
Even to secure them,
Yes.
would require
Yes.
some work.
I just want to mention something else that's associated with this that we'll be dealing with. We're not voting tonight. We're going to be voting next Monday. Part of what's going on is in conversations I had with Kate and Jen, there needed to be the appropriate appropriation so that they could spend money on this project come July 1st, because it wasn't in the fiscal year 23 budget. And the decision has been to create a special revenue fund so that the monies will go in. We're going to fund it with about $400,000. It's going to be addressed at the Board of Finance to their meeting tomorrow. We'll be the only committee reporting on that. I'll have a little more detail next Wednesday. I think it's a great idea on how to handle this, and the Board of Selectmen will be voting on it on the 20th, which is the next day of our meeting. I'm in the process of building a pro forma statement covering fiscal years 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. I'm not showing the numbers now. I'm just going to tell you what the basic philosophy is of what we're building. First, that the Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed operating budgets for years fiscal 23 and 24, we're having an increase, it's actually for 24, of a 3.25% for that year because inflation's still here. And we know in fiscal year 24, there's already staff people that are going to be added to the Board of Selectmen, an additional fire inspector, probably somebody in the health department, and maybe somebody in the senior center. And there's probably there's at least one or two positions that the Board of Ed talked about adding in fiscal 24. I don't think we've hit 2.5% increase in our budget since the first year of the pandemic, or the year that the Vikings landed in Darien. So I just don't think what's currently at 2.5 is a reasonable number. And I think that even if it was moved to 3% in the model that they're using at the Board of Finance, I think it would allay some of the fears of the people that are concerned that the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed budgets would be compressed. I do feel that if they can't live within a 3% budget going forward in the next couple of years, we have bigger problems in Great Island. So I also have library going at 2.75, which is consistent with what they've done. We're going back to capital using the capital 6-year plans that have been presented by the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed, which is about $6 million a year. We've been using other things to pay those things down. we're putting them back as funds to be raised from taxes. Then I'm going into the existing debt that we had in the schedule, HHR debt that we projected before, and other debt. I'm also throwing in 3 other things, some numbers for the dam, the reimagined library. I spoke to Duke about it, probably 25, 26, fire engines in 25, because those are things that we know will happen. And we'll come up with what we know the town would have had, projected what the town would have had if Great Island didn't exist. Grand list growth of 1% in 23, 24, and 25, and 0.5 in 26 and 27, even though that's not really addressing the reval. Then we get into Great Island. For the first 2 years, there'll be, it's recommended to do notes. The Board of Finance will be discussing that tomorrow. But my understanding is because we do not know what the taxable amount of the debt is, it's probably wise to do notes until we know that point. The taxable portion of any municipal debt, well, besides the fact that the market blew up last week, but that's about 75 basis points, as was mentioned, incremental cost over what tax-free debt is. We're probably going to, in this model, we're going to get a warning probably as soon as we issue the 100 mil notes or debts. Not the worst thing in the world. Once we start to issue some of the school debt, if we're issuing it on 20-year notes, there's a good chance that we might be downgraded to AA+. That is an incremental cost of about 25 basis points to the 3 school tranches and any incremental debt. And so that's just the line item thing, incremental cost. Then there's cost, there's 3 FTEs now. They currently are not on benefits. If we replace them, they would have benefits. There's a rough estimate there. And just the model, just to have placeholders there, is moving in 24 to 4 FTEs and 5 FTEs, not additional, but 1 additional in 24 and 1 additional in 25. Once we have a better sense of what security might need, this, that, the other, and have a better understanding. And then it stays flat for 26 and 27. There's also some carrying costs and other things like that. So starting in 24, estimated costs are about 500,000, and then 750,000 in 25, and then the rest is flat with its 3% increase. Here's the difference. If you go in there, we know that there's certain things that have to be done. We don't know if there's storm drains. We do know that eventually there's going to need to be sewers, some parking, some bathrooms, widening the roads, and some other things. At Checkpoint Charlie at the beginning of the gate, because people can't just say town owns this, so I'm going to drive around, especially while we still have tenants in there and other things like that. Checkpoint Charlie at the high school was going to cost about 150,000. So we're putting in about 300,000 for it. And again, it's a placeholder. So total infrastructure, we have about 5 million as an estimate to be issued in bonds in 24. We're then saying, look, there's going to be something done at Great Island. I don't care if we take the big manor and turn it into the largest Chuck E. Cheese in the country. It's going to be a cost. And so we're estimating in our model between 15 to 20 million, and that's net of 5 to 10 million of fundraising. For the model, we put in 15 million with debt being issued in 25, 26, and 27. From there, we can review the grand list, make assumptions. The one other thing that we have in there is as these costs are going up, our unassigned fund balance needs to be increased. And some of the ways that we've been increasing it over the past couple of years by closing things in the capital reserve, by having an extraordinary amount of people resigning or retiring in the Board of Selectmen budget, which generated a 2.9%, almost a 10% over what their budget was net, is not going to continue to happen. Even some of the other things, closing out the 100,000 on special ed, ARPA funds, and other things like that. So we're just estimating that that's going to need to be increased. And so the fact that that's going to be increasing over time, and identifying what the fund balance would be, we're using a 16.5% versus the 15, which is a little higher than the 15, but from what I understand, that's not a bad number from the rating agencies. And since we have more debt, having that there isn't the worst thing in the world. And then we'll come up with our numbers. And I hope to have those numbers for you when we're meeting next Monday. So that's basically what we've been working on, and go from there. So again, it's placeholders. We don't have to define what it is, and we can do that probably better than the first selectman or the Board of Finance, because they immediately say, well, what are you doing to have that? And we don't have to. We know it's going to be something, and those really aren't bad numbers. We've been able to build them based upon some other projects that have been going on. We know that the cost of blacktop takes about 2 years from the increase in the oil to hit the the final cost. It costs about $400,000 to do about 90 spaces at Highland Farms. So if we're going to do that, it could easily cost us $600,000 to $800,000 for a similar thing if we even wanted to use blacktop instead of some other impervious type of project that's there. So that's basically it, other than Bert had his hand raised before and I didn't recognize, so I'm calling on Bert now so that he can make his comment. I'm sorry, Bert. But we can't hear you, Bert, so can you undo your mute? No, we're not hearing you. That's part of the problem, Bert. Can you do an undo a mute on your computers? Make sure it's unmuted.
I suspect there's a problem with Bert's actual microphone because he's unmuted.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on, Bert.
Or you may want to try doing what I did, which is dialing on your phone for the audio.
Yeah.
We're going to move this along, but are there any questions on the model that I just put forward? Does it seem reasonable? Does it answer some of the questions that I have? Mark, go ahead.
Okay. It makes sense to me, Jack. The timing, I touched on in my remarks. There's some items there that I think would have to be addressed sooner rather than later to be able to preserve keeping those tenants, whether it's the housing tenants or the equestrian tenants, or I can't remember what other tenants there are, to keep them, to preserve their quiet enjoyment of under their lease rights and to keep that revenue stream coming in. But aside from that, the concept I agree with across the board.
Yeah, I mean, there's also things like I found out. I took a tour earlier. I had taken a tour earlier with Monica and Jim very early on, and there's some things I haven't seen, so I'm going to be taking the tour again. But there is the storage shed that has equipment in it and other things like that. Reading the contract in a conversation with Kate, that equipment is not part of the deal. So I don't know what equipment's good, not good, whether or not there'll be something else on the side, whether or not who owns it and whether or not it's going to be removed. I've also requested that we have a better understanding of where the oyster beds are. I've been told that it's illegal to destroy oyster beds in the sound, and that reminds me that I owe something to you, Mark, and I'll tell you what the place is in 2 seconds as I'm going to mute myself, but that may have some limitations on what we can do. But I agree with people that anyone thinks that we are going to go in there right away and make some decisions will make bad decisions, and that this may very well take 5-10 years to properly figure out how best to use this property on that. There is one other thing that I'm going to mention, and I just have to.
What scariest thing for 2022, Joy, is that in so many of these races, election deniers are going to be sitting on the.
I don't. Somebody who's not muted is coming through. All right. We're going to be going through a reval, and 2 revals ago, when there was a great compression in the marketplace, there was a shift in who was paying taxes, and it really went to the bottom half of the homes in Darien. We're going through another reval shortly, and again, there's going to be a shift in what's going on. Not that the prices of homes have collapsed like they did 8 years ago or 10 years ago, but rather the homes in the bottom third to middle third have increased by a greater percentage than those at the top. The $5 million homes aren't selling from 10 the way they were in 2008 and before. So again, we're going to see a shift. So part of the problem that I have with taking a single home of any value and saying, oh, you're only going to see a 8% increase, and I'm taking a number, just taking one, isn't really fair. Because based upon the reval, some people may be seeing a 12% or more increase. Other people may be seeing 8%, and other people may be seeing 4%. So depending upon what that shift is, and I don't want to try and quantify what it is, there will be an increase in certain people's taxes, even if Great Island didn't happen, simply because the reval and the shift in taxes. But I'm going to ask you to hold for 1 second. I'm not supposed to do things that are not on our agenda because it's a special meeting. Mark, it's Copps Island, COPPS Island in Norwalk. Great oysters. Copps Oysters, rather. Yeah. It's down by a little bit past the park on Little Side Road, but the oysters are great. And that's not a paid announcement, but I promised Mark that I would tell him where I get my oysters. So,
Jack,
Jack, I just wanted to mention something on the mill rate question.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's a question of change over time for residents of Darien, but to my mind, there's also a question of competitiveness, right? Like, we don't want to out-tax ourselves versus, let's say, New Canaan, right? I mean, I think New Canaan is a bit ahead of us mill rate wise at the moment, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah, is at the end of the day, we have to think of not only the people who live here now, but we want to make sure that people continue to want to come here. So if they're in New York City and they have little kids and they move to the suburbs, then we want to make sure that a decent share of them come here, right?
yes, but I'm going to add to that also. We don't want to tax people who are currently living here, especially those with the high inflation and on fixed incomes, so that they feel that they have to leave our community. Because having that mixture of those empty nesters and those who are on limited fixed income, and there's more people in this town than you realize, as well as those on the very edge to some diversity in our town. And I think it's important that whenever we're looking at taxes, we consider everyone, and not just say, well, this town's a wealthy town, everybody can afford this, because that's not always the case. So that's part of the reason why I want to build this model, because I think that when we see the model, for some of you, I think you're going to say, yes, this is still a good deal, because holistically it's a good deal. But we should, and part of our responsibility from F&B is to ensure that we're presenting the financial pictures as we see it. That doesn't mean we don't have to agree with everyone, but it's the financial picture that we see. So,
Jack,
Um,
I'd like to add two comments if I may.
ahead.
Yeah, I mean, with respect to your placeholders, and I'm not a contractor, but I've been involved in doing, I'd like to throw out the idea that in terms of determining how we should look at these placeholders, I think we need to err on the high side, because going through the house, which is again, we all think this is a magnificent thing, but I think we need to acknowledge and accept that we're basically buying a money pit. Now, we may want to buy that money pit for all the reasons why people talked about, but we need to accept that the house and some of the other pieces of property that are going to need capital work, big capital work, it's going to be a lot of money that's going to have to be spent down the road. The most simple, straightforward example of that was looking at the peeling paint all over that mansion. I'm sure that's all lead. And I talked about this with some other folks. The lead abatement bill in fixing that house up is going to be gargantuan, and it's just it's just an example of why I think we need to make sure that we are not minimizing the assessment of how much value is assigned to placeholders for work that has to be done on the property. And it's if we want to buy this piece of property, I think we just have to get our arms around the fact it's going to raise our taxes probably more than we think. And that's why we have to nail the financials down so that they're truly accurately reflect all of those things.
But
Jack,
we're never
Jack,
going to get.
Bert.
Go ahead, Bert.
Can you finally hear me?
We can all
Yes.
finally hear you. Thank
Okay.
you, Bert.
On my phone now. So I did go for the tour on Saturday morning with the added pleasure that Martha was there, and I am stunned by the beauty of the property. However, we're not aesthetics people. We're not green people. We might be, but this is not what this is all about. It's about money. So, yeah, I'm concerned about was it Peter? Was it Peter who said we? Is this
Wait,
me?
Bert, stop for a second. You're echoing. It's as if we're in the Alps.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I think out of the other one. So
There you go.
sure, I'm convinced there's some cost coming onto us down the road. But I'm aesthetically, I don't think anybody can dispute that this property is wonderful and would make a perfect addition to the town of Darien, and we all would enjoy it. My concern is, does it make sense financially? And that's our concern. We're F&B. And you cannot, I think Patrick said it in one of the meetings, you cannot make a decision on that until you know what are the alternatives. If, for instance, somebody were to buy the property, and already we have 3 influential senators saying they want this to be low-income housing, at least for part of it, and suddenly this whole thing gets away from planning and zoning, and this is going to be 200 units and 200 more children at.
Bert, I really don't want to go into that part of the politics of it. I understand what 3 senators said. I don't think it has any bearing.
Okay, it's not in politics, it's in finances. If we
I agree with the finances.
Okay, if we develop the property, we let the property to be developed in a different way than the town wants it to be developed, we need to discuss what the costs are to the town when that happens. When we have implications for the school system, for the roads, um, and for everything else that happens around town. That's why I think we cannot discuss any of these issues without discussing alternatives that may or may not happen. Because if we don't make a decision on keeping this for the town, and it gets away from us, it may come back to haunt us. That's my
Well,
comment.
all right. I'm, I'm interested in discussing the financials for what I think it's going to cost based upon some of the estimates and that. Um, if we start going out estimating what else it's there, then, and I'm more than willing to have some offline discussions on that, on the comment that I made to Iris, earlier, but, I really am not, interested in having that conversation here because it's a distraction. The real thing that we have, and I agree with you in F&B, is it's nice to look at all the pretty trees and other things like that. And if it was just looking at the pretty trees, this is voting for puppies and kittens. But F&B isn't responsible for puppies and kittens. F&B is responsible for what the costs are, or what we perceive the costs might be, even in a worst case scenario, so that we can present certain outlooks in it. I agree with Peter. I agree that, some of the ways that we came up with some of these numbers are, hey, we're renovating for school at approximately 25 mil each. This building is probably a little worse. There's some remediation that has to be done in lead paint, those on the asbestos, other things, but they're all looking at that now. So if we put some money out there, that's fine. But again, to me, it's a placeholder because I don't want to get into too much detail because then people debate, well, should we have a walking trail? Should we have this? Should we have that? And it's also with the recognition that I think it's not unreasonable to think that the generosity of the people in town will partially offset some of the costs that they're going to be doing. Part of the discussion of the conservancy, if that ever comes about, it will come back to the RTM. So my goal is solely to deal with the numbers that we've dealt with, deal with the running from it, come up with another set of numbers and saying this is what we believe the cost. And as simple as that.
Jack,
And people will vote yes or no.
Jack, I respectfully disagree. The question in front of us is the town going to buy it or is the town not going to buy it? And if the town is going to buy it, there's some repercussions. And you're right. We have to figure this out. But if the town is not buying, there are also some repercussions, and we should consider those before we make a decision. That's all.
Yep. Well, the other repercussion is it could be worth $200 million in incremental grand lists based upon the amount of space, what homes they would have to be there, what the infrastructure would be, and everything else like that. So on one hand, you have 200 units of affordable housing. On the other hand, you have 200 million of incremental tax grand lists. In either case, it's a conversation. I wouldn't vote for something simply because the state is threatening for us that would put our taxpayers at a disadvantage for years to come. That's not a good enough reason to do that. I would not vote for something that puts our schools at a disadvantage or our Board of Ed, Board of Selectmen providing services. So I
Okay.
think that this is going to show it doesn't. And that I think is what's important.
Not what I'm saying, Jack. I'm not saying we know the alternatives. I'm just saying we should sit down and figure the alternatives, and they're not for free. Okay? They're not for free.
All right, well, I'll consider that at next Monday's meeting.
If somebody else develops this property and there's different ways to develop it, there will be costs to the town, and we cannot just simply say this. Okay, I said.
All right. But we're not going to have that conversation today. Is there any other comments on the concepts of the models that we're working on?
I just want to, again, the market also is giving us some opportunities, and I think that we're still in very low rates. And now that the 30-year, the yield curve is inverted, I think, again, the possibility of issuing 30-year at a lower rate and just to just try to make the most of the circumstances, and considering the inflation we're having at the end is just issuing debt that with inflation at the end being liquefied. So I hope that we really take a serious consideration on that 30-year possibility instead of the 20, considering that the rates are inverted, the curve is inverted.
I think the recommendation going based upon the models that I've sent out, done by the bond council, that is 30-year on the Grand Island debt, less whatever the taxable amount is. It's going to be solely the Board of Finance's decision of whether or not they go 20 or 30-year on the schools. We currently, in the model they're using, is 20-year, and that's what we're using. We're using their runs from their bond counsel and advisors within our model. We approved it. Now it's up to the Board of Finance. They may or may not have a conversation on that tomorrow at their meeting. I definitely believe that will be part of the conversation. Hearing from other people in the market, they did say that even though it's a longer debt, but going 30-year on the schools may be an advantage to us as well, even though that timing is a couple of years out before we're issuing the first tranche of 25. Also in the model, which we're doing the same, they did take a haircut of $4 million on the school debt, which I thought was reasonable. It's the minimum 5% of the grant. It's very consistent with what we saw on Ox Ridge, where we're not issuing all of our debt. I think we're getting back someplace between 7 to 8 million on the grant. And therefore, we're using that to complete the project as opposed to issuing new debt. And that's how come before we had the 18 million that you heard during the budget. Well, 4 million of that was actually double counting some of the HHR, so that came down to 14. When you take away the grant money from Ox Ridge and a couple of other school projects that we're anticipating to get some roofs and other things like that back in, it ends up being a little over around 4.1 million, and that was built into the Board of Finance's model. I mean, look, there's going to be some changes in how we look at things. I've had conversations with people in town. In the past, we had such capacity, the rates were so low, we really went for bonding when there's a cash flow issue, because we really take money from our general fund and loan it to ourselves for these projects until we needed some more money. Let's go out and do another 5 million in bonds. With what debt we're coming on, that's going to change. So, some of the stuff that we've been bonding on an annual basis, sidewalks, $400,000 tracks and other things like that, will be reviewed in greatest scrutiny. I know that Kate, when she was Director of Finance, and Jen does now, they look at the projections, 6-year projections, to see what might be bondable. Again, it wasn't as formal because we had a great deal of capacity. Now that will be a more formal process, I suspect. But anyway, Martha, you had a comment.
Well, I was just thinking on your model, I wonder if you should, and I don't want to complicate things, but show a couple scenarios. I mean, you're taking the 6-year plan, and you know, a lot of what's in the 6-year capital plan is related to maintenance, but there's some nice to have items in there, which I would hope if we purchase something like Great Island, we'll say, you know, Great Island is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Some of these other nice to haves, perhaps we can delay them and, you know, do them in the future, so that, you know, we try to take care of the tax rate as best we can. So that was simply my thought. I think the nice to haves may or maybe should be delayed. And
I
still
fully
have
agree.
for that
Martha, if I may-
range.
Martha, with complete and total respect, I disagree. I think this is the essence of what many people are concerned about, is that we can't, you know, if, you know, think of it this way. If we can afford Great Island, then we can afford and fill in the blank. And
You can't look at it that way.
well, my concern is that existing town services and what all the other things that people are thinking about in terms of what existing framework of spending and services being provided, whether it be public safety or parks and rec or the schools especially, is going to be squeezed. And I think that is probably my major overall concern, in addition to the financials. The financials at the top, to make sure that everybody has a clear picture of how much this is actually going to cost, because this is a gargantuan amount of money, a gargantuan debt. And I agree with Bert. This project could be a straitjacket on the town financially for years to come, especially with how much money a lot of the improvements that we're talking about could cost. But it's it's where I approach this as, if we're going to buy this, we have to continue to support our existing town services the way they are. And if there are expenditures for those things, especially in the schools, that we should not be compromising those. If we can't afford to do both, then we should think about not doing. Again, schools are more important. Other things I think are more important. It's a nice to have, but are you going to take away from other things for something that is a want but not a need?
Peter, I want to address that just so that I'm perfectly clear before you do, Martha. First of all those things that you were talking about with services that are provided to the town and the Board of Education resides in their operating budget. In this model, we have a 3.25% operating budget for the next 2 years, which was above the guidance that we had for this year. All right. Library did 2.75, but that's what they can come into for both. So if you can't live within a 3.25 for the town and the school, then there's bigger problems, because this town cannot have continued 4% increases in the Board of Ed or the Board of Selectmen budgets. That's just not sustainable either. So we put in a reasonable amount for what's there. Capital, look, they did a plan over there. Some of those costs are going to go up, some are going to go down. I'm going to tell you, if some of those projects hadn't moved to ARPA, I mean, 35,000 on signs is a nice to have. That was on my radar from when I heard it the first time. There were a couple other things that were added back, another 10,000 into make this other little spot in town look nice with flowers and other things like that. That's nice when you're coming in under 3% in your budget, but when you're starting at a 379 or something, then those 10,000s are things that should be looked at, and that, I think, is supportive of what Martha's saying. And I am going to run certain scenarios. So, I mean, I haven't looked in detail. I don't want to look in detail. I'm saying, okay, on average, we've used 6 million. We've actually been bonding about 2 million a year. So maybe we add that to the bonding. Things change. We started out with over 9 million requests for capital this year. 2.9 came away. 2.8 came away from the fire engines. About 570 went away because of ARPA, And then there were some other things that were on that schedule for future years that are in ARPA now. So things that were in for fiscal 24 and 25 are being paid by ARPA. So, I mean, we have a little bit of leeway there. So my motto is at least not putting a squeeze on anything. So
Okay.
that's what I'm saying. Our motto isn't showing that. My motto isn't going to show that.
Okay. Jack, did Peter say nice to have? Okay. Did Peter say that? I say terrible not to have from a financial standpoint, because you open a can of worms. If this place is developed in ways we cannot imagine right now.
But I honestly, that's a distraction, and I'm not going there. I don't care what Duff wrote.
Okay.
My honest comment about that, I can't say in public. But
I don't
I'm
like.
not
have
living
never-
on what he said as to whether or not I should have to purchase this now because Duff, Billy, and the other guy who's now going to be serving us in the is threatening something for us. That's not how I decide. And we all aware of it. It's an elephant in the room, but I'm not wasting this committee's time on discussing.
Okay.
I just
So
not.
I'm
Sorry.
only doing it because I look long term. Okay. I understand there'll be tremendous repercussions on the budget. Okay. And I think one of the things we need to do is to have a holistic approach. Suppose we were to say we find together with the departments and the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen, we find a way that the budget in 2024 is not going up at all. I know it's a fantasy. It's not going up at all. It's only going up for the $7 million that we have to include for the debt service for the capital charges, and so it has to be viewed holistically. If there's other ways we can cut back on cost, can we find a way to afford the additional property and the cost associated with it? And the other thing I want to say is, if you do that, if you buy the property and you manage it, yeah, there'll be additional monies to be spent on that. And the Board of Finance said on the average house, it's $700 more in.
That's crap. So we're not going to mention that. That's a bunch of crap.
In property taxes. But also, there may be $1,400 a year or $14,000 over 10 years when you sell your house because your house is worth more because Darien is worth more. That is my argument. Thank you.
Bert, I'm going to say two things. First of all, I think Charles and several other people have asked whether or not, and I had a conversation with people in town, whether or not we could quantify that the houses in town are worth more because we now have this property. And we can't figure out how to prove it. Is the house going up by 1%? Is it going up by 2%? How much of it is driven by the market and how much isn't? My concern, and I'm going to reiterate what Peter said, when school parents are hearing people talk that we should keep our operating budgets flat to pay for $7 million of debt, that's scaring the bejeebies out of school parents. And that's not what the Board of Finance has projected, because they have a 2.5, and that's not what our model is projecting. Whether or not we do a capital project this year or next year, as I said, we have a lot of capital projects that were in that 6-year plan that's being paid by ARPA. That's what Martha's asking. You know, if we've been doing $6 million a year and maybe we can do $5 million a year, you know, will that be looked at? Yeah, probably. But that extra million sometimes is adjusted simply because new projects come in and other ones are deferred. So that's a reasonable amount. But, you know, I really, I don't want the distractions to this committee about threats from the outside that, that that the moon's going to hit us or other things like that. We have financials. We can look at the financials. We can make projections on the financials. And I think, as I said, moving the operating budgets even up to 3% a year, which is more than reasonable for our towns to live within, allays a lot of the fears of the school parents who think that their schools are going to be squeezed out, because I don't think that's going to be the case. First of all, the Board of Ed has to go and make their assessment of what's going on after the superintendent. It has to go to the Board of Finance. And, you know, it's unfair to ask the Board of Finance to make any commitments for future boards of finance. They're going to look at the budgets the way they've always looked at the budgets. And then we're going to look at the budgets the way we always look at the budget. So that's the only thing I can say on that. And I really don't want to get into that because, again, to me, those are the distractions. We have to keep the distractions out. So, any other comments? Mark?
Jack, I want to make 3 comments. I echo what Martha was saying. We're going to have to look closely at those nice to have capital items, which we always do every year. The bar might shift a little bit on some of those nice to have. This town's been very good about addressing those in the recent past. Peter's right. In my 15, 16 years on the RTM, this town has demonstrated a capacity to maintain core services, whether you focus on Board of Ed, which is what's being talked about here, Public Works, emergency services. My opinion is that this town has been very good about maintaining those core services. That's what the largest cross-section of our population, our constituents, want. So Peter's spot on there. And then Luis, I think made a very good point about the bonding, and I just want to get on the record. I support 30-year bonding for a long-lived asset like this that doesn't depreciate. I'm on the record as questioning some of the bonding for shorter-lived assets that do diminish over time, and the risk there of having future taxpayers pay for assets that they don't get the benefit from. But here, this is an asset that will live on, and I don't know if perpetuity is the right word, but 30 years makes sense on this, unquestionably, in my mind. So those are the 3 points I wanted to make, Jack. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mark. And I would agree, with you, because you and I at the end of rules, we're having that conversation on some of the things that we've bonded in the past that might come under greater scrutiny. And speaking to some people in town hall, they agree. I do like 30-year. I'm not an expert, but I will rely on the Board of Finance. Look, the Board of Finance has done a really good job for this town in figuring out how best to layer our debt and whether or not we delay principal, do this, do that over the years. That is allowing us to have 30 million of pay down of debt, keep the debt pretty much in the 10 to 11 million range for all these years, so that we weren't seeing significant fluctuations in our taxes and other things like that. And so it's good that we're giving them input. I trust that when the time comes, Jim and the rest of his crew will hear what people are saying, but also we'll listen to the bond counsel, Brown Advisor, and do good analysis on that. That's the area that I really trust. Go ahead, Mark.
And Jack, I agree with you. To clarify, yeah, I was making my comments from the perspective of matching asset life with bond life, but a cash rule. This town's been very effective, and I'll leave that to folks more skilled than me in that regard.
No, Mark, I wasn't challenging what you were saying. I fully agree that matching the assets to the liabilities is something that we could potentially do a better job at in the future. And we'll have to look a little bit with a closer eye because our capacity isn't the same of what we had and the rates aren't the same of what we had. So
Understood.
anyway, if there's no other, oh, Iris.
I think in some ways we're getting like too bogged down in a lot of stuff we don't know about. So this is a decision of, is this the right decision to buy this? Can we bond it? Can we afford it? Because we are always going to look at our annual budget as we have always looked at our budget. And there will be lots and lots of nice to haves in there, as there are every year, where we all go, no, that's not like, I'm glad you think that's nice to have, but we don't think it's nice to have. So that's going to happen every year, regardless of whether we buy this project or not. And so I think you're putting in. I also think that thinking about what's going to happen to this project is kind of like putting in placeholders are perfectly fine, because there could be something where we do some sort of public-private thing where money gets raised from, oh, and I'm just making this up, from the Darien Land Trust, and they buy part of the property from us because they had private funds raised. So we get money to come in. Like there's all sorts of things that a committee can analyze about this property to come up with ways to save it, incorporate it, private fund it. Like we don't even know what can be done. And there might be years where we spend no money on it at all, because we don't always spend money on any of our other parks every single year, right? Other than operating expenses. So I just think we can get, there's so much minutia that can just bog us down. We just have to, everybody's going to have to make their own decision as to whether this is a right decision, you know, morally, ethically, financially. It's just, it's all going to come down to how you think about this property and who should save it. I don't know.
And that's why part of the reason I'm just putting in a placeholder. And I said,
Yeah, I'm
I don't
agreeing
care.
with you.
I don't care if they put a Chuck E. Cheese in there. You know,
Yes, you
I'm
do.
not. I don't really want to get into the details of it. It's not our point to get into. And you know, at some time, if they decide that they need to, what they're going to do, and they need additional funds and everything, they'll be back to us. So we'll have a say in it down the road. Anyway, if there's no other comments, I'd like to adjourn this meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn? I see Louisa, I see Barry, all in favor of adjournment. Just say aye, wave your hand, or do anything else. And thank you. I'll get information out to you. I'm not, I don't want to just put everything out there until we have it, and we'll talk about it in different ways. But I don't want this model to be used against the park either. I think it's going to be exactly what Iris just said. Anyway, have a pleasant evening. Let's see if the Yankees can hold off the Rays.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack.
Thanks,
And
Jack.
Jack, next Monday we chat again?
Yes, Monday again.
Okay.
Okay, and if you can forward the additional dates, Jack, please. I will be.
Yes, I
I
will.
will.
I will. I'll send
Thank
it
you.
out right now.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Take care. Bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.